Keima is a lonely Call of Duty reject who becomes obsessed with conquering dating sims instead of getting a life. However, everything changes when he makes a deal with a demon who forces him to clap girls with evil spirits. It all started when, as usual, Keima was caught playing video games in class, causing him to get whacked in the face. This resulted in him looking like Boots from Dora the Explorer. However, the idiot went back to his video game harem in no time. Suddenly, a girl came running into him and damaged his precious game in the process. The airhead was named Ayumi, and she asked Keima if he could clean the roof alone, since he wasting his life anyway. Keima had no intention of assisting a real-life girl, but Ayama had left a broom and run for the hills already. Later, Ayama was stuck on roof duty alone, so he lamented how real girls were like Sakura, useless but present. He logged back into his game world, where he was known as the Capturing God. He was so good at bagging game baddies that losers like you sent him emails to ask for advice. At this rate, Keima could out Zeus. Just then, Keima received an email saying they had a girl for him if he could truly conquer any girl. Keima felt insulted by the challenge, so he clicked the button to proceed. Suddenly, the sky went black and a pink thunderbolt came crashing down on the roof, revealing a floating girl called Elsie. Elsie thanked him for accepting the contract and dragged his scrawny ass off to go find runaway spirits. When they reach a classroom, Elsie scans the area while Keima swears he'll never mix meth and coke again. After getting it together, he asks who the heck she is, so she explains that she's a demon from hell who is now part of the runaway spirits team. Keima concludes that she's high on Febreze and tries to leave when Elsie warns him that his head might explode. Keima suddenly notices the collar on his neck and asks what is going on. Elsie explains that he signed a contract with a demon, and Keima realizes it was that shady email. Elsie then adds that if he fails to meet the conditions or breaks the contract, his head will get popped like a champagne bottle. Keima immediately demands that she get the damn collar off him, but she says they need to round up the runaway spirits first. Her alarm goes off and she points Keima to the nearest one. It turns out to be Ayumi from before, but this time, she's got an evil aura that screams, "I don't wash my bra." Elsie explains that some evil spirits from hell have come to the surface to wreak more havoc, but they hide in the hearts of humans. This is why the runaway team needs human partners who can force the demons out of their hearts, aka make them fall in love with you. When Keima asks how he's supposed to do that, Elsie says getting soul-snatching kisses would do the trick. Unfortunately, Keima breaks the news that the most action he's gotten from a real girl is when his mom kisses him goodnight. Elsie starts to weep as she realizes her fate is in the hands of a virgin, while Keima asks her to get the collar off. Elsie reveals that it's impossible and promises to die with him to make up for it. She also has a collar on, so if the contract is broken, both the human and demon make like New Year's fireworks. After hearing this, they end up outside depressed. Keima makes his list of games to replay before he dies, so Elsie asks him why he doesn't just try his video game RIZZ in real life. Keima laments that they're not the same thing. For instance, the girls' track team doesn't even have their hair tied up. When Elsie wonders what the big deal is, Keima gives her an earful, concluding that he can't conquer girls who put in zero effort. However, Elsie points out that Ayuma just tied her hair up, but Keima claims it won't be enough. He insists that he's powerless if they keep wearing diapers instead of booty shorts. Elsie then works her magic and says she can change outside appearances, but she needs him to work on the inside. The next day, Keima shows up with huge banners to support Ayumi, so she runs up and dropkicks him for embarrassing her. Keima tries to RIZZ her up on the spot, but Ayumi strangles him and warns him not to try it again as she storms off. Elsie warns him that Ayumi might take his head before the collar does, but Keima assures her that it's all according to plan. For the next couple of days, Keima continues to show up with large banners that annoy Ayumi, until she finally decides to ignore him entirely. Elsie shows up and points out that Ayumi seems to hate him more now, but he says hate can easily turn to love, while he exhibits game withdrawal symptoms. They suddenly overhear the third years scolding Ayumi for using out of their training time. When she asks for her punishment, they tell her to run 30 laps around the field. Later that day, Ayumi finishes her sentence and her friends come to cheer her up. They point out that Keima should have been there to cheer her on, but Ayumi says it doesn't matter. The next day, Keima resumes the banner harassment, but Ayumi keeps ignoring him. Elsie assures Ayumi that if Elsie wins tomorrow, she'll surely fall in love with Ayumi, but when Ayumi runs her practice round, she ends up tripping over a hurdle. Ayumi ends up spraining her ankle, which means she can't run anymore. So her friends point out how something seemed fishy with her hurdle. Keima watches as Ayumi sulks alone, while Elsie prepares for the imminent popping sounds. However, Keima says they've reached a turning point and he can see the ending. That night, he gets Ayumi to meet with him, but she scolds him for being insensitive with his good luck gift basket. Keima says he was hoping she'd do her best in the race the next day, but Ayumi insisted that her ankle was twisted and asked him how she could possibly run. That's when Keima says that she isn't really injured. Ayumi asks what he's talking about, so Kima explains that she would have gotten injured if she was running at full speed, but since she didn't have her hair up, that wasn't the case. Ayumi finally gives up the act and says that it's better this way. She laments that she hasn't been able to run well since she joined the team, and no matter how hard she practices, she hasn't been able to improve. Ayumi cries as she wonders what's wrong with her, but Ayumi tells her to simply do her best because she already ranks #1 in his heart. The line almost pulled the demon out of her till she started pummeling him for being so cheesy. However, when Ayumi notices the running shoes in her gift basket, she asks Ayumi if he'll come to cheer her on the next day. When Kima agrees, Ayumi leans in and kisses him, which releases the evil fatso inside of her, allowing Elsie to go Ghostbuster mode. The next day, Ayumi wins first place, and her upperclassmen even congratulate her for winning. Kima goes back to his video games as Ayumi has lost all memories of the capture. However, when Kima wondered why the collar was still choking him, his classmates suddenly asked where he'd been hiding his little sister. It turned out Elsie was officially joining his school as his sister. The whole class began fawning over how cute she looked, unlike Kima's vanilla. But when she assured them her brother could bag all the girls in the school, they laughed their heads off. After school, Elsie tried to follow Kima, but he insisted she'd get the collar off him since he's done his part. However, Elsie broke the news that there were still many runaway spirits to catch, so she figured living and going to school with him would make things easier. Kima insisted that she wasn't his sister, and there was no way she could weasel her way into his home. However, his mom, Mary, showed up and invited her in. Once inside, Elsie casually claimed she was the illegitimate daughter of Mary's husband. Mary thought it was a joke till Elsie handed him a letter from her late mother, prompting her to run to the phone and disarm her husband. Mary told Kima his dad was officially banished to the milk store, but promised to take care of both of them. Later at the store, Kima refused to accept Elsie because she hadn't fully established herself as his little sister. For that, the acceptable conditions were to be related by blood, have shared memories, and care deeply for her brother. Elsie tried to argue, but when he insisted it was useless, Elsie sucked on his finger and took some of his blood to fulfill the first condition. Kima walked out on her, so Elsie planned to show him how caring she was. That evening, Elsie cooked dinner and tied Kima up, so he had no choice but to eat it. Elsie planned to feed him a meal that looked like Nemo was found in hell. Kima tried to beg for his life, but his mouth was forced open to eat. It was surprisingly not bad, so Kima commented on how sparkling clean the house was. Elsie informed him that she had been on cleaning duty for 300 years thanks to her trusty broom. She tries to show him a demonstration but ends up blasting through the house by mistake. Then Kima's stomach finally finds Nemo, and he runs to the toilet to shit him out. Later, Kima takes a bath, lamenting about how he needs to get rid of Elsie. But when he remembers the memories he's had with her so far, he realizes she's starting to meet the conditions. Suddenly, the lights go out, and Kima feels something touch him. When he tries to reach for the light, he finds Elsie in the bath with her sisters hanging free. Kima jumps out and asks her to stop triggering these weird little sister events. That's when Elsie explains that she really is a younger sister. Back in hell, she had an older sister who was truly a demon among demons, but on the other hand, Elsie was a glorified housemaid. When she got chosen for the runaway spirit team, she was so happy she could finally do demon work. The sob story failed to move. Kima's and Elsie began sobbing in the bath, so Kima told her that since he's a man of logic, his senses are telling him to accept her as his sister. Elsie was overjoyed, and Kima assured her it had nothing to do with the sight of her grape seeds. However, he plans to capture the evil spirits to be rid of her for good. Elsie was overjoyed to hear it, so as a thank you gift, she helped and washed his game with soap and water. The next day in class, Elsie writes a note for Kima, who looks more depressed than usual. When she tries to pass the note, the teacher tells the student to read out its content, and the whole class hears her apologize for something that happened in the bath. Kima uses this as further motivation to find the runaway spirits. After school, Elsie runs after Kima, who's sick of her bad luck, when they notice a crowd of desperate students. When Elsie asks what's going on, Kima explains that since the food in the cafeteria is expensive, everyone buys sandwiches from that vendor. Just then, Elsie's alarm goes off, and she tries to find who the runaway spirit is in. Suddenly, a rich girl called Mio walks up and tells the commoners to part like the Red Sea. The vendor hands her a sandwich, and her butler tries to pay with a 10,000 yen bill, but the vendor says they don't have any change. Mio tells her to hand over as many sandwiches as 10,000 yen can buy, and the vendor officially gets sold out. When the students complain, Mio tells them it's their fault for being dog poor. Elsie sadly announces that they've found their target. Later, they scope out the target, and Elsie says she'll probably be a lot to handle, but Kima claims she'll be a walk in the park. According to him, standoffish characters act hard and on the outside, but they're actually pure on the inside. Elsie asks how he can be so sure, so Kima assures her he's seen her type 300 times in his games. Kima then looks Elsie in the eyes and tells her he's in love with her. Elsie starts freaking out since even demons frown at that law in Alabama, but Kima explains that he was just testing out a love confession from his game. His plan is to confess to Mio right from the beginning so she doesn't dictate the pace. With this, he begins to practice his best lines on Elsie, but she's too much of an idiot and takes them seriously. The next day, Kima confesses to Mio and asks him out, so Mio calls her butler to deliver him some pain as she walks off. Kima expected the rejection, but something felt off, so he tells Elsie to track the car down with her powers. They'd follow the trail to a massive house, but it appears to be the wrong house. The trail actually ends at a cheap apartment that's definitely infested with cockroaches. Kima and Elsie look in through the window and find the butler begging Mio to stop pretending to be rich. However, she refuses, saying her dad always told her to raise her head high. The butler reminds her that her dad is now 6 feet under and her mom struggles to make ends meet, scolding her for buying so many sandwiches. The money was supposed to be her allowance for 4 months, so the man asks what she intends to do now. When Mio says she'll eat sweets, the butler reaches his limit and quits his job. Mio tries to chase after him when she spots Kima at the door. She gets embarrassed, but tells him to know his place as she shuts the door behind her. Elsie is shocked to discover she's church rat poor, but Kima scolds her for ditching him. Meanwhile, Mio panics about getting found out, but when she remembers her dad, she decides not to give in. On the way home, Elsie laments that they're off to a bad start again, but Kima explains that they've made major progress. This way, they'll be two strangers brought together by a mutual secret. Since no one else knows that Mio is broke, that's something they can bond over. Elsie asks if he's sure she won't just think he's a stalker, but Kima is confident he can make a good impression. He swears to continue following the rules of his games to victory. The next morning, Mio's butler doesn't show up, so she starts to walk to school when Kima shows up to be her new chauffeur. Mio worries that he might be trying to steal her panties to sniff, but Kima tells her to just take a seat on the bike. Mio insists that she'd rather walk than touch his miserable bike, but her heels fail her at the wrong time, spilling all her sandwiches. Kima tries to convince her to change her mind, but Mio refuses to use such cheap junk. Upon hearing this, Elsie uses her powers to change the bike into an impressive ride. Kima asks her to reconsider, so Mio finally gives in reluctantly. As Kima busts his Mio wonders if he really loves her that much, but decides she can never love a commoner. When they arrive at school, the students are shocked to see Kima as a servant, but he tells Mio he'll be waiting after school too. The next day, Kima continues his duties, but the carriage is even bigger. Mio commends his efforts, but he's barely clinging to life. The next day, Mio admits that he's very devoted and wonders what he wants. However, by the 5th day, Kima throws in the towel. Mio scolds him to do the job, but Kima says his legs would snap like twigs if he tried. Mio offers to motivate him and pulls out a whip, so Kima climbs up a pole to escape. When he slides down, Mio catches him and laughs, but when she catches herself, she says she's going back home. Elsie pops out and says that even as a demon, she thinks what Mio is doing is wrong. She didn't even pay any respects to her dead father. Kima says that she's probably a good person at heart, according to the route he's following. With everything he's done for her, he should have triggered enough events, so something else is likely holding her back. Just then, he spots a letter on the floor and finally sees an ending coming. The next day, Mio waits for Kima, but when he's late, she starts to storm off. He eventually shows up with a pumpkin carriage and says he's prepared a suitable dress too. That night, a rich people's ball takes place while Mio waits outside for Kima. He shows up dressed in a suit, and Mio is shocked by how cute he looks for a commoner. Mio asks why she brought him to this event, so Kima says he didn't think she should spend so much time in the health hazard of an apartment. Mio asks why they're in the backyard instead of the main hall, so Kima says he was hoping she'd give him some dancing pointers before going in. Mio says that he can't possibly go in since it's only for the rich and famous. She tells him to hold his party outside, though no one would attend. Elsie shows up with some drinks, but Kima scolds her for dressing up like a guest instead of a maid. Mio gets annoyed, so she pulls Kima away and offers to teach him to dance. She stretches out her hand, but Kima doesn't know what to do it with, so she grabs his hand. They both get red in the face, then she begins to show him how to move. As they dance, Mio remembers the time she danced with her dad and suddenly gets sad. At that moment, some douchebags appear from the party to ask what Mio is doing there. They'd ask if she's really living in a garbage can with her mom and tell her she can come to take food inside, since that's probably why she came anyway. Mio feels terrible, so Kima asks why she keeps clinging to this lifestyle. Mio insists that she's rich, but Kima tells her that her dad is already satisfied. She tried her best to live the way her dad wanted to preserve his memory, but Kima tells her it's time to live her own life now. Mio remembers her time with her dad and insists that if she continues to pretend, he'll never die. However, Kima reminds her that she finally smiled when they were together, and he wants to see more of it. Naturally, Mio decks him in the face and sends him flying. She confesses that her dad has been getting smaller and smaller in her memory since Kima showed up. Kima insists that she finally has to choose for herself and live her own life. As Mio is moved to tears, Kima plants a wet one on her, causing Casper's not-so-friendly cousin to be pushed out. Thankfully, Elsie successfully traps it in her ghost bottle. The next morning, Kima is back to his video games when Mio stops him and asks if her change is enough to buy a sandwich. Kima says it's enough to buy two, so Mio walks off as Elsie points out her attitude is still the same. Kima says Mio is better off forgetting about him and her father so she can live her own life now. Sure enough, Mio finds her way to the front and finally pays for a sandwich. Meanwhile, in a world somewhere, an artist was waiting for who would view her sketch, but she was always left alone in the end. This girl belonged to a game that couldn't be conquered, so she had given up hope till a new player showed up. That morning, Kima had his head buried in his game, so his mom scolded him, but it didn't change anything. As they left for school, Mary told Elsie to make sure Kima didn't get ice-kayed by Truck-kun by accident. Elsie agreed, but when she tried to talk to him, he iced her out. Even in school, all Kima would focus on was his game. The Crimson Chin cussed him out for not listening, but Kima wouldn't budge. In the next class, Kima was back at it and got smacked on the head for the same crimes. For the whole day, he got punched, whacked, and slapped, but only his game brought him to tears. Elsie asked what the matter was, so Kima mumbled something about being powerless. Apparently, the rumors about a game that couldn't be conquered were true. Elsie says the game must be pretty hard for him to have given up, so Kima decides to explain what's wrong with it. The heroine in the story is an artist, and there's a scene where she wants to show you her picture. However, if you pick yes, she just asks the exact same question. If you pick no, the outcome doesn't change. This is because there's a bug that causes that scene to loop. Normally the game should move on to the next scene, but thanks to the bug they're stuck there. Kima laments not seeing the red flags before buying the game. The advertisers were doing way too much in marketing tons of merch to go with it. However, the release was pushed back 23 times. When the game came out, all the Twitch streamers descended, but thanks to countless bugs in the system, they all abandoned the game. Elsie tells Kima it's not his fault that the game has a bug, so he can't do the impossible. However, Kima insists that he's the capturing god and no game can stand against him, so he intends to get victory. He drags Elsie with him and tells her to write down every choice he makes. He explains that the loop may be avoided by following a different pattern of choices, so they're looking for the one that doesn't lead to a dead end. Kima gets pumped and turns on the game, but it fails immediately. Turns out it doesn't start 2 times out of 3. They start with the first choice and Kima decides to go to the cafeteria with the artist. Unfortunately, he's given an endless list of food to order from. However, he insists they have to go through everyone if they hope to change destiny. To make matters worse, the game doesn't allow you to save progress either, so every time they fail, they'll have to start from the beginning. Elsie thinks this sounds scarier than the devil himself, but Kima drags her back by force. They try the game again, and the heroine ends up upside down. At some point, a creepy old man becomes the heroine and Elsie gets tired of how cursed the game is. Kima says there are still more options to try, so Elsie asks if it's really that important to clear the game. She goes off to get a drink, wondering why Kima can't be so dedicated to capturing spirits. When she returns, she finds Kima still going at it. He orders something new at the cafeteria and suffers through a pointless mini-game, only to end up back where he started. He tries over and over again, but keeps suffering the same fate till something in the game finally changes. The heroine asks if he wants to see her picture, and they're suddenly back in the cafeteria again. It's a miracle that Kima hasn't set the game on fire yet, but he keeps going through the exact same loop over and over till he's completely exhausted. Just when he's about to lose it, Elsie tells him the next item on the menu so he can keep going. Elsie asks why he cares so much, so Kima explains that even though the game is a dumpster fire, it's not the heroine's fault. The heroine is waiting for someone to save her, so he can't abandon her, just because the game doesn't work. Elsie suggests complaining to the company that made the game, but Kima announces that they closed up a month ago. Kima is literally the only one left playing the stupid game. He promises to save the girl and cues a delusional montage with the fictional artist. Finally, she asks him to look at her pictures, and the game doesn't loop around. The heroine thanks him and Kima rejoices that he finally broke out of the loop. Elsie feels proud of the weirdo, but as he tries to head to the ending, they discover it's literally just a bunch of gibberish. However, Kima swears to not be defeated by such bugs and powers up for another marathon. In the future, someone looks up the game online and sees the news about the bugs. Rumor has it that one person saw the ending, but no one believed him anyway. One evening, while the family had dinner, Elsie watched as a new idol named Kanon won the Best Artist award. This made her super excited, so she tried to share it with her buzzkill fake brother. But as usual, Kima couldn't care less about a girl who wasn't pixelated. Unlike Kima, Mary thought it was cute that Elsie was trying to copy Kanon's bow, but Kima insisted that TV idols weren't a thing anymore. Kima said that they were in an era of game idols who were resistant to wear and tear. However, Elsie disagreed, claiming that Kanan was cuter than any zeros and ones in his game. Kima was quick to counter, reminding her that real idols would get saggy and wrinkly, while game idols have improved ever since they were created. In his fanboy delusion, Kima suggested that old fools like Elsie would be left behind in the new world. Suddenly, Mary snapped and told the kids to observe their table manners, so they finally put a sock in it. The next day in school, Elsie noticed Kima wasn't in class, while everyone else had their cameras out for some reason. When Elsie asked her classmates what was going on, they explained that Kanan was returning to school after 2 months. Meanwhile, Kima was back to drowning in video games when Kanan walked right past him. She monologued about how hard she had worked to become an idol, though she still looked slightly sad. When she turned to leave, she noticed Kima sitting there and prepared to get the usual star treatment. However, Kima asked who the hell she was and told her to stop bothering him. Kanan was shocked and tried to ignore it, but she ended up using a stun gun on him and his stupid game. She decided she wasn't an idol after all, and took it out on Kima a second time, who only cared about saving his game. Elsie rushed to Kima, but when she saw Kanan, she forgot her brother was being barbecued. Kanan was happy to finally be recognized, so Elsie grabbed Kima's game to ask for Kanan's autograph. Kima was barely clinging to life in the background, but Elsie was too busy fangirling over a serial killer. While Elsie continued to simp, Kima grabbed his game back and discovered the Dan marker wouldn't come off. Elsie then scolded Kima for not telling her that Kanan was in the same class as them. Kanan was pissed to learn she was in the same class as that fool, so this time she tased him down low, so he can never produce more idiots like him. At that moment, Elsie's alarm starts going off, while Kanan laments how trash he must be if people in her class don't know her. Kima fears that his life might come to an abrupt end, so he hopes to at least save his game, but thankfully Kanan powers down and runs away. Kima prays to never meet again till Elsie breaks the news that the cough syrup addict is actually a runaway spirit. Meanwhile, Kanan went to class, and even though everyone else would sell their mothers for a picture with her, she only cared about Kima. Kanan barely had any time to rest for herself as she performed shows, visited fans, and modeled for different agencies. She starred in movies and was living every girl's dream of becoming anorexic. Even little girls wanted to be like her, so she worked harder and harder. After a stage performance, she asked her managers how she had performed, so they told her she was perfect as usual, making her happy. The managers noted how different she was from when she was in Citron, but in reality, Kanan was only pretending. Back in school, Elsie was giving Kima the rundown of their next target, but Kima said he wanted nothing to do with her. Elsie reminded them that the location of their heads depended on this mission, so Kima wondered why the runaway spirits kept targeting girls who sniffed glue at a young age. Suddenly, he found a CD from Kanan asking him to come to the roof after school, or she'll rip his berries off and fry them. Because of this, Kima honored her invitation, so she shyly thanked him for coming up. She told him to keep this a secret, then announced that she was going to defeat him. At that, she revealed her elaborate stage setup and began to perform one of her songs for him. Elsie couldn't believe she was pretty much attending a concert for free, while the rest of the school wondered where her music was coming from. Kanan continued to put on an impressive performance, and Elsie began to wonder why she was doing so much for such a useless male specimen. As Kanan sang with a smile on her face, she declared Kima her enemy in her heart, and for her, singing and dancing was the only way she knew how to fight. She planned to convert him into a fan, but when she looked at him, the bozo was back into his video games. Emotional damage! Wondering what she wanted to talk about, Kanan returned to her sparky goom goom settings, but before she could shorten Kima's lifespan, her phone rang, and she left for an important meeting. A chopper appeared from nowhere to whisk her away, but she made Kima promise to be there the next day. Unlike the other simps, who came out of hiding, Kima only simped for the game in his hands. Elsie asked why he was being so cold to her, so Kima explained that he was trying not to take the bait. Usually in games, the boy does the chasing, so if a girl chases after you, she's probably a crack baby. In addition, she wiped out his game data, and that was actually the main reason. The next day, Kanan put on another performance, and this time, Kima tried to listen. He wondered why it mattered that one person didn't recognize her. However, his game started calling out to him again. At the same time, Kanan felt great during her performance and was convinced she was no longer the person she used to be. Unfortunately, when she looked up, Kima was shamelessly blowing snot bubbles from sleep. Kanan began sinking into a depressive state while being harassed by the letter P for some reason. She decides she is no good and suddenly vanishes into thin air, while Kima and Elsie wonder what's going on. Elsie began to panic, but Kima assured her people don't just vanish in real life. When they look closer, they see she's actually transparent. She begins to stumble forward, as she reveals that she's just the same as before, invisible. With this, Kima finally knows what to do. He goes to her and tells her she's wrong because he was actually listening. However, Kanan doesn't buy it and tries to send him to another world, but Kima has gotten good at dodging her. When the tree behind him collapses, Kima puts his life on the line to display premium simp behavior. Kanan manages to turn back to normal, so she storms off and tells him to be there the next day. Kima is grateful to have survived one more day and wonders if it's the runaway spirit making her invisible. Elsie scolds him Kanan for ignoring her, but Kima says that he was trying to shock her into revealing what was bothering her. He then compared it to bidding at an illegal auction house. He would pay any money to obtain the secret to a girl's troubles, and even if he got shot to death for it, it would still be worth it. Elsie tells him to stop geeking out, so Kima states that the mission can't begin until he knows what's troubling her. For now, he's made up for his bad impression earlier, but he still needs to find out more about her, so he tasks Elsie with gathering information. Meanwhile, Kanan relives some of her childhood trauma, making her driver feel bad for her, so he puts one of her songs on to cheer her up. That night, Elsie forced Kima to watch more of Kanan's interviews. Kanan announced that she had new music coming out soon, and Elsie claimed that was important news, but Kima knew she was just trying to make him into a fan. Kima then watched as Kanan performed Live flawlessly. However, when she saw someone in the audience only focusing on his sneaky link for the night, she panicked for a second, and the rest of the fans noticed. However, she tried to continue the concert as if nothing happened. Elsie pointed out how strange she looked, but once the performance was over, Kima went right back to his precious games. Elsie figured that since it was a live broadcast, she could still meet with Kanan at the TV station and ask what was wrong. She quickly flew over the TV station, though a gust of wind tried to ruin her mission. She managed to stick the landing, but everyone looked at her like a crazed fan. She was thrown out like trash, and while she lamented outside, she noticed a crowd of sim ninjas run past. They lined up on both sides and bowed to greet Kanan for doing a good job. Elsie figured Kanan was in the van, but when she tried to chase after it, an old man told her she couldn't follow. Meanwhile, Kanan's manager told her she messed up her lyrics and has been tanking her performances recently. Kanan assured her she was fine and said she simply needed a good night's sleep. However, she continued to look sad. Meanwhile, Kima took a bath with the love of his life, the game. It pissed him off that Kanan wasn't like the video game idols he was used to. Suddenly, he overheard Mary scolding Elsie for being out late alone. Elsie apologized for being dense, so Mary hugged her and let her cry it out. Kima wondered what the soap opera was about till he got sucked into it, and scolded by Mary for being a older brother. Elsie apologized for getting him dragged into it, so Kima asked what information she'd gotten. She pulled out the pictures she took with Kanan's fans, who apparently told her a lot of new information. According to them, Kanan used to be in a group called Citron, which was initially founded to promote its leader, Lime. However, Kanan became more popular, so the group broke up, and the other members quit. Now, Kanan doesn't sing any songs from when she was in Citron. Elsie says that Kanan is clearly very lonely and asks Kima to be nicer to her. Kima insists that her circumstances are irrelevant to the mission, but he intends to start making deliberate contact with her now. The next day after school, Kima laments that Kanan didn't show up on the day he finally decided to care. Meanwhile, Kanan was swamped with idols, which was delaying her. She was sad she didn't get to see Kima that day, but as she flipped through her book, she saw something that triggered more trauma. Apparently, her classmates always told her she didn't stand out. Even the gym teacher had forgotten her existence and asked if she was really a student. At school, Kima received a message from Kanan, so Kima explained that he snuck her his contact in the CD case she gave him. However, when he met with her later, she was back to being depressed. Conan asked if she was invisible again, so Kima assured her he heard her song and she was great. Conan's mood is a complete 180, so she asks Kima if she can keep sending him messages. Apparently, he's the only one she's ever talked to, even though she mostly tried to take his life. However, Kima sees this as an easy win by establishing such an important position with her. Before he could respond, Kanan was already gone, but she texted him a million thanks, which seemed unhinged. Later on, she texted him again, forcing Kima to show up at her event. In the dressing room, she told him seeing his face gave her the strength to go on, so Kima was glad to be of help. However, as time went on, she began to call him every time she felt sad, anxious, or insecure. She called him so many times that Elsie ended up dragging his exhausted back home while his phone started blowing up again. Some days later, Kanan met up with Kima at an outdoor cafe. This time she said she didn't have any stories of woe and just wanted to see him. Just then her song came on and everyone was excited to watch her, making her happy. However, when she saw the time, she said she was late for a show and just wanted to see Kima's face. After she left, the broadcast announced that Conan would be performing on stage by 8. Another publicity bus announced that she'd have her first solo concert on December 24, but Kima looked worried. On that day, Kima met with Kanan, who seemed excited to be performing for such a large crowd. She tells him it's a dream come true for everyone to be coming to see her, which means she's no longer invisible. Kima returns to his games, but when Kanan tries to complain, she notices he's playing one of her songs. She asks him if he likes it, which makes him embarrassed. Then he praises her for doing a good job. After, Kanan runs off happily while Elsie appears and tells him it shouldn't take much longer to fill Kanan's emptiness. However, Kima isn't so sure. Inside, Kanan greets everyone as usual and heads into her dressing room. Outside, Kima finally finishes his idle game, but when he remembers Kanan, he concludes that something seems off. Suddenly, Kanan's manager announces that Kanan is missing, and everyone begins to search for her. However, Kima says he can see the ending now. 2 years ago, Kanan and her friends stood at that very same auditorium dreaming of becoming big enough to fill it. Kanan felt it wouldn't be easy to do, but Lime assured her they would be big in no time if they listened to her. Following Lime's lead, the girls began to practice their debut song. They took their positions and sang their hearts out together. In the present day, the auditorium was sold out with thousands of fans coming to see Kanan. During hair and makeup, Kanan's stylist mentioned how special she was to pull that off, but Kanan said it was the work of the staff members. The man then pointed out how cute she's looked lately and asked if she'd fallen in love. Kanan blushed and said it wasn't like that, but the man got a phone call and had to exit the room, leaving Kanan alone. Kanan was excited about how hard she had worked to get there when she heard a voice coming from the mirror. It was a vision of her younger self who warned her that despite how far she'd come, it would all be over if she screwed up. Her inner demon asked if she could really sing on such a huge stage alone. It warned her that everyone would abandon her if she failed, and since Citron is gone, she'd be all alone forever. At that, Kanan remembered how they took down the Citron poster so her nerves made her invisible. Moments later, her stylist returned to the room, but Kanan was nowhere to be found. The staff began searching everywhere for her, but they tried to keep it hush-hush so the reporters wouldn't find out. The manager called for more reinforcements to find her, which Kima and Elsie overheard. Elsie began to panic, but Kima told her to calm down since it was all going according to plan. They had reached a critical point, and he had to find Kanan first. Elsie calmed down and asked how he planned to find someone who could turn invisible in such a large area, while their only choice was to search high and low for her. As everyone else carried on as usual, Kima searched everywhere. The auditorium was slowly filling up with guests, while Elsie and Kima were on high alert. Backstage, the manager got word that their search had been futile and time was running out. One of the staff suggested that she might be in trouble, so maybe they should inform the police. That would cause the concert to get cancelled, so the manager suggested they wait till the last second. Outside, Elsie was having no luck when she spotted Kanan's fan club from before. She flew by to talk to them, so the man asked if she was also there for the concert. Elsie almost blew the secret of Kanan's disappearance wide open, but she managed to save it at the last minute. Before she left, the man showed her an old Citron DVD and asked if she wanted to watch with them, but Elsie pictured Kima calling her brain dead again and politely declined. She quickly took off to resume searching, but she just missed Kanan. Kanan felt that she couldn't fulfill her dreams, even when there were 3 of them, so there was no way she could do it now. Those recurring trauma flashes were definitely not helping either. She breaks down thinking she'll disappear, until she remembers Kima and decides she needs to see him again. Meanwhile, Elsie joins up with Kima, who hasn't had any luck either. While they rest, Kima says that they'll lose if they don't find her before the concert starts. Elsie finally remembers that they can track her with the soul sensor, so she activates the device, while Kima wonders what class of idiot she is for not doing this earlier. The device goes off, meaning she's nearby, so Kima finally spots her sitting by herself. When he approaches her, she becomes visible again, then he asks why she's not at her big concert. Kanan seems a little out of it, so Kima asks if she's afraid she'll turn invisible again. Kima guesses that she became an idol, so people would notice her, so she's afraid of going back to square one. Kanan says he really does understand her, but Kima says it was just a coincidence. Kanan jumps on him and asks him to stay by her side, so that when she fails, she'll have him. She goes in for a kiss, but Kima refuses and says that's just a cop-out. He tells her to stop relying on others and says her singing is fine the way it is. Kanan laments that she can't do anything on her own, but Kima reminds her she already has. At that moment, Kanan hears the cheers of her fans and the lights reaching out of the stadium, all for her. The fans cheer with all their might, while the manager hopes she can hear how much they love her. Kima tells her he can't keep her all to himself, so Kanan understands and starts to walk away. However, she tells him he was willing to sing for one person alone, and goes back to plant a kiss on him. A suspiciously shaped spirit comes out of her and Elsie scoots it up easy peasy. Kanan returns to the auditorium, and when the manager asks where she's been, Kanan apologizes. The manager sends her to get ready, but before she enters the room, she notices a couple of flowers from her old bandmates and feels happy. Moments later, the stage lights up and Kanan finally appears on stage. She begins her new song about the light that brought her out of darkness, while Kima watches proudly. Kanan continues her magical performance, and as it comes to an end, she remembers her time with Kima and tells the mystery man in her song that she loves him. The auditorium goes wild, and even Kima is surprised at how good she is. She then rips off her ballad outfit and gets ready for the rest of the show. She slays the performance, making the crowd almost as chaotic as the time Michael Jackson made people faint from just standing there. Kima and Elsie leave early, and she asks if he's finally changed his mind about real idols now. Kima says no, because Kanan's no longer an idol, but is now a shining star. The crowd continues to chant her name as Kanan finally has the time of her life performing. Later, when everyone is gone, she returns to the stage to sing part of Citron's debut song and thank everyone who helped her come this far. Some days later, Mary was taking a shower while something sinister was approaching her house. As she soaked off, she felt a disturbance in the force, so when she tried to see who it was, she came face to face with a monster. This chaotic day began when Mary overheard Kima and Elsie goofing around again. Inside the house, Kima ran for his life from a living organism, which Elsie claimed was his lunch. Kima lamented about the obvious problem, but Elsie said leaving it alive would keep it warm until lunchtime, and apparently she made an even bigger one for him. Kima refused to accept food that could probably eat him instead and called Elsie flawed like that artist game he played. Later at school, a classmate asked Elsie why she was soiling the air with bad energy. Elsie lamented about how mean Kima was, but the girl told Elsie it was best to ignore him. However, Elsie said she was only good at cleaning and cooking, and she just wanted him to give her credit. At this, the girl gets the gist of things and suggests she make a strawberry shortcake so Kima can praise him. Elsie grabs the magazine excitedly while the girl tells her she can charm any man with cake. Elsie then gets determined to show her just what a demon from hell can do with her hands. In the next period, the Crimson Chin called on Elsie, but she left a blow-up dummy in her place. Meanwhile, Elsie heads to the homework room to get started on following the recipe. First, she needs to measure some sugar, so Elsie happily pulls out live sugar from hell. Next, she has to beat some egg whites, but she has trouble choosing what kind of egg to use. While she looks through her options, one of the eggs hatches into a dragon and chases her out of the classroom. Eventually, Elsie manages to lose the dragon and is relieved that it didn't eat the cake. She finally finishes the egg whites with a touch of wings when she notices Kima standing right there. She panics and hides the mix before he sees her, that she tells him he'll finally witness her true power later that day. Afterward, she goes on a baking montage featuring magic from hell and a new and improved way to avoid cancer while using a microwave. Elsie focuses extra hard on making this the best cake ever since she's screwed up many times before. Through the power of intense concentration, Kima was finally able to complete the cake. The finishing touches were the strawberries, and if she got them right, Kima would finally give her the praise she deserved. However, while she was daydreaming, the dragon showed up out of nowhere. To make matters worse, the rest of the eggs hatched since they were heated by the fire, so Elsie was completely surrounded. However, it was actually the microwave that made the first move by exploding, leaving Elsie burnt and without a cake. Later that evening, Kima played his video games with a brand new head injury. He asked Elsie why she wasn't in class earlier, but she insisted that she was. She continued to stare at the strawberry shortcake, hoping to get it right one day when Kima broke the news that he wasn't a fan of sweets. Elsie couldn't believe her ears and tossed the cookbook away. However, here's what actually happened from Kima's point of view. After Elsie had tried to feed him with food that tried to eat him back, he blamed Elsie for ruining his life, so he wondered how long he'd have to put up with her. Later in class, Kima wondered if the universe hated him and found solace in his game. The teacher called for him to receive his test results, so Kima walked up to him without taking his eyes off his game. The teacher warned him about his attitude, but Kima assured him that he was 100% perfect in his tests too. The teacher got mad and insisted he couldn't just do anything he liked because he got a perfect score. Afterward, the teacher called Elsie up next, but the blow-up version didn't respond. During lunch, Kima wondered where Elsie had gone when he noticed sugar balls bouncing around. Suddenly, a dragon came from nowhere and flew past him, making him wonder what the hell was going on today. That's when Elsie appeared behind him, attempting to hide what was in her hands. She told him she would show him her true power that day, but Kima figured she was up to something stupid again. Later, during gym class, Mr. Chintastic announced that he'd be taking over and told everyone to run 20 laps. As the boys started their punishment in disguise, Kima struggled to make it up to 1 lap. The teacher was happy to inform him that the last to finish would run 20 more laps. He then offers to reduce it to 10 if Kima apologizes for this morning. Because of this, Kima pulled out his secret weapon and used his game to give him an energy boost. Unfortunately, that wasn't how the real world worked, so the teacher scolded him and said he'd be stopping by later to talk to his mom. To the teacher, people like Kima were most likely to end up robbing banks with toy guns. At this, Kima insisted that anyone who tries to compare games to reality are the ones who can't tell the difference. The idiot returns to his divine delusion of living in a world separate from reality. The teacher was about to slap reality back into his thick skull when an explosion occurred, and he found himself getting chased by the green dragon. The other demon hatchlings came rushing past Kima too, but he was tired of wondering what was going on. When Kima returned home, he figured Elsie must have caused the pathetic date he just had. He suddenly noticed a cake outside and wondered if this was the power Elsie wanted to show him. Kima considered giving the cake a shot since Elsie spent the whole day sulking, but when he got a game notification, he sprinted in and forgot about it. Meanwhile, Mary got a call from Kima's teacher about his visit that evening. She wanted nothing more than to kick the man's chin back in, but she had no choice. To prepare, she hopped in the shower and lamented how rotten Kima was on the inside. However, that was when she checked to see who had been peeping. She didn't get a good look, so she rushed downstairs to catch them, but after spotting a broken vase, she thought someone had broken in. Frightened, she grabbed a vase for defense and headed to the kitchen, where she found someone crouching on the floor. She immediately attacked, but it turned out to be Kaima who was finally trying Elsie's cake. Meanwhile, the dragon had stopped on the roof to try some cake when Kaima's live lunch snuck out of the house to confront it. At that moment, the teacher witnessed the lunch devour the dragon whole and feared for his life. One morning in school, Elsie tried to apologize for making a cake that exploded from too much flour. Kaima then scolded her for knowing nothing about their world and asked her to get some common sense. Elsie claimed that she went through training on the human world and received an A in Japanese history. However, when Kaima asked what the last thing she learned was, she narrated how scared the Japanese people were when American ships arrived. Kaima had had enough, so he told her to go to the library and learn about their world. Elsie headed for the library and was excited by how massive it was. She skipped her way through the aisles and ended up picking a dictionary on obsolete phrases. When nothing in it made sense to her, she decided to grab something easier. The idiot ended up picking a book about fire engines. She essentially replaced the black ships in her history with fire engines and learned nothing new. She decided to learn more about this magical truck and headed to shelves for more, but after looking around for a while, she realized she had no idea what she was doing. Thankfully, her brain functioned enough to suggest asking the librarian for help. At the librarian's desk, a girl called Shiori was peacefully reading her book. Elsie tried to ask for help, but there was no proof that Shiori wasn't comatose until she closed her book. Shiori seemed to fall asleep after, but when Elsie startled her, she knocked some books down. Shiori finally asks how she may be of assistance, so Elsie asks for more books on fire engines. Shiori simply stares for some seconds and tells her to come back after school. Elsie wondered why, but Shiori stared at her, hoping she'd go away. Suddenly, Elsie's soul monitor went off, so she ran off to tell Kaima she found another runaway spirit. After school, Elsie dragged Kaima to show him their new target. Kaima lamented how basic the librarian girl character was in games. He said that if she wasn't a stellar exception, he wasn't interested in the mission. Elsie wasn't sure if a semi-nude girl counted as stellar, and noted that she couldn't even tell her where to find books on fire engines. Kaima tried to leave since she wasn't worth his time, but they ended up bumping into Shiori, who delivered 458 books mentioning fire engines. Elsie grabbed one and started going to town with it while Shiori explained the arrangement of books to Kaima. Kaima was amazed at the library's indexing system, but in reality, Shiori picked those books from memories, since she's read every book in the library. However, she decides to keep that to herself, so she doesn't sound creepy. Kaima observes Shiori as she has a conversation in her head that ends with her walking away silently. As she returned to her seat, she concluded that she didn't have to deal with people as long as she had her books. The library was her castle. Elsie asked Kaima if this was going to be a difficult one, but Kaima wanted to know why she was reading up on fire engines. The next day, Shiori returned to the library and began going through her usual routine. To her, every book was a new world of boundless imagination. It was a more effective way to travel without getting on a plane. She could be anyone or anything, and she loved it. She didn't need songs, art, promises, the ocean, or anything because books had them all. Basically, books were her meth, and she was happy to do them every day. Meanwhile, Elsie read Shiori's details to Kaima, asking how he planned to approach her this time. Kaima explained that approaching librarians has a golden rule, which is to listen to her inner voice. Even though they are very quiet, librarians are always thinking. Elsie asks how he plans to hear her thoughts, so Kaima boldly claims he can hear them anytime he wants. However, when Elsie points out that it only works in games, Kaima says they're screwed. Meanwhile, Shiori sits with her book as usual when she overhears two lovebirds making plans close by. This ticks her off as she believes the library is a sacred place for learning and not making googly eyes. She then got interrupted by the head librarian, who asked her to hold on to a list for her while she went to the faculty office. When Shiori saw that it was a list of books to be discarded, she was devastated. Later, Shiori began sorting the books for discarding, wondering where they would all end up. Kaima then walked in and noticed Shiori staring at the book intently. She continued to grab the books on the list, but when she tried reaching one on a higher shelf, she lost her balance and tripped. However, Kaima stopped her from falling. Shiori got embarrassed, but as she watched him return the book, she recognized him as the boy from yesterday and wondered why she helped him. She decided she needed to thank him, but started overthinking how exactly to say it. Kaima simply stared at her as she panicked and turned red in the face. Shiori knew she had to act fast or she'd lose her chance, but after she glanced at the economics book in her hand, she ended up saying thankonomics.
What?
As Kaima and Shiori stared at themselves like parallel brick walls, even Elsie was surprised that she wasn't the dumb post in the room. Shiori hides behind her book in embarrassment, wondering why she can't say a simple word. She decides the best thing to do is leave, so she starts walking off till she hears Kaima say that books aren't necessary anymore and they just take up space. Shiori can't believe her ears as she starts to defend the books in her head. She gets close to telling Kaima off, but chickens out when she realizes everyone is entitled to their own opinion. She decides to walk away again since confrontations aren't her thing, but then Kaima says books should be discarded after scanning. This time, Shiori storms straight up to him, but the only thing she's able to do is to call him stupid. She immediately begins to malfunction afterward, and then she turns around and leaves. Later, Elsie scolds Kima for making a book lover mad with his words, but Kima insists that books with large covers are actually useless. Elsie says he shouldn't be picking fights with her, but Kima reveals that he was finally able to hear her inner monologue. Since she doesn't talk much, they probably can't have a normal conversation, so he made her mad on purpose. Elsie is impressed by how unafraid Kima is of making a bad impression. He then asks what she's doing, so she explains that she's reading about fire engines since Shiori went through such trouble to find the books. At this, Kima is surprised at how unafraid Elsie is of being useless. Meanwhile, Shiori mentally beats herself up for calling Kima stupid instead of thanking him for his help. She thinks her mouth is the one that's stupid, just like when she was younger. She broke a flower vase and the kids threatened to tell on her. She wanted to apologize, but her lips wouldn't budge. When she got older, some girls asked her opinion on a book, but she only stared like a gargoyle statue. In reality, she had read the book 24 times, so she wrote a mini thesis as a review, but when she tried to hand it to the girls later, she ended up creeping them out. She always found it hard to communicate with others, so when she found the magic of books, she rushed right in. In the library, she was like a fairy who had unlimited power and freedom to explore. Since the library was a record of human history, Shiori could learn all she needed to know without saying a word. A dream come true for someone like her. Just then, Kima noticed her come to terms with her state, and he says he can hear her inner voice. The next day after school, the library committee met to discuss the opening of a new media room. The other students looked excited to incorporate CDs and DVDs into the library, but Shiori looked even more dead on the inside than usual. The head of the committee rounded up her speech when Shiori stood up in objection. However, when they tried to ask her what was wrong, she simply turned red and stayed mute. Since no one could read minds, the meeting was adjourned and everyone left. Elsie asked Kima if he thought Shiori should talk more, but Kima said she didn't need to if she didn't want to. This was because he didn't need a mouth to play video games. Elsie wondered why Shiori was targeted by a runaway spirit and suggested that she might actually want to talk, but Kima refused to accept such a cliche. Meanwhile, Shiori was wishing their ancestors developed telepathy instead of speech when she noticed Kima writing inside a book. She immediately grabbed the book. Then she noticed it was the same guy from yesterday. She wanted to tell him to drop dead, but all she managed to do was stare. When Elsie saw the book herself, she asked him why he wrote in it. She explained that the author got the timelines wrong, so he corrected them. He figured that incorrect information served no purpose, and though Shiori agreed, she couldn't get behind writing in books. Shiori got closer, hoping to scold him, while Kima casually said that without instant editing, books were seriously outdated. Shiori finally worked up enough anger to call him an idiot, then she walked off in confusion. Elsie was getting bored of him, ticking off everything in his skirt, but Kima insisted he was simply making conversation with her. Elsie said there wasn't much improvement from stupid to idiot, but Kima objected. According to one of his crazy video game theories, the heart of a bookish girl could be observed from the liver. This meant that significant changes were happening inside of her. The next day, Shiori found Kima writing in another book, so she planned to give him a stern lecture this time. She grabbed the book, and just as she was about to give it to him, he informed her that it was his own book. Shiori saw he was right, and wondered why she got humbled when she was finally ready to talk. Shiori thought she should apologize, but when she remembered how much of a pain he was being, she decided not to. She was worried the library would be full of insensitive people like him once the media room was finished, but she realized she had been talking out loud. Kima pointed it out, so she walked off embarrassed. The next day, Shiori found Kima in the library again and figured he was trying to torment her. Kima informed her she was talking out loud again, and Shiori concluded that anger must really be powerful. Kima then said the library was a nice place because there were no disturbances and he could be at peace. At this, Shiori joined him and agreed that the library was a fortress of paper that kept out the rest of the world. Kima introduced himself and Shiori said her name too. However, when she retreated to her corner, she wondered why she engaged him at all. On the other hand, she felt they were able to connect somehow. Later, Elsie told Kima he was a genius for getting her to talk, so the conquest should be over soon enough. Despite the progress, Kima struggled to pinpoint where the emptiness in her heart was from. They suddenly noticed Shiori tear up a piece of paper and storm out. When they went to check out, Elsie was able to put it together and hand it to Kima to read. Kima saw the book disposal was to make room for a media room and could finally see the end coming. The next morning, Shiori walked in a store to get supplies for her secret mission. She tried to get assistance from a store worker, but she gave up when he walked the other way. Afterward, she carried a bunch of weird to the library with her. Inside, she grabbed the books that were to be discarded and started a pile around her desk. She made the trip multiple times and barricaded the doors with chairs to stop people from coming in. Lastly, she got her ink ready and began making a note to protest. Later, the head of the library committee arrived to find the other members locked out of the library. Apparently the password wasn't working, and one of the students told her to take a look at something. It was a note that said Shiori was opposed to the media room. Inside, Shiori began to hear the demands of the committee head to let her in. She tried to block them out, but they kept banging on the doors. Elsie wondered why Shiori had locked herself out, so Kima told her there were plenty of signs she would have seen if she wasn't obsessed with fire engines. When Elsie asks if they should stop her, Kima says it depends on how the rap plays out. Meanwhile, Shiori starts to worry that the students might get a teacher to intervene, but she reminds herself it's already too late. The committee head sends one of the students somewhere, so Shiori heads back to her desk. On the other hand, Elsie and Kima wait on the rooftop as Elsie puts her powers to work again. Inside the library, Shiori is determined to stop them from replacing books with DVDs, but as she waits, she begins to feel tired and ends up falling asleep. In her dream, her teacher asks why she broke the vase, but she says nothing. Later, she was late to the music room and wished could just go in and joke about it. However, she didn't want to get in trouble or draw attention to herself. She planned to go in when the piano stopped, but since it never did, she ended up walking away. That was when she found the library. Inside, there was no one else around, and when she grabbed a book, she realized she could just do her thing without interruption. She finally found peace in her book. Suddenly, the knocking from a window jolted her from sleep, and Shiori realized the students were still trying to get in. When she backed away, she noticed some rubble on the floor and went closer to investigate. That's when she found Kima sitting pretty on one of the shelves. He said he also didn't want quiet places to be taken away and gave her his support. The idiot face planted to meet her, leaving Elsie on top with no plan. Shiori sees he's like a character from a fairy tale and thinks he's not so bad. She decides to take him back to her base so he gets comfortable and goes back to playing his video games. Shiori wonders what to do next and hands him a tea drink. Kima refuses the offer, so Shiori places it on the floor, thinking he's rude. She wonders if she should try talking to him, but when she can't think of anything to say, she wishes he would do the talking instead. She remembers the time she was asked how she felt about a book, but she wrote it down instead. She then states that no one will understand her if she doesn't say anything, but accidentally says it out loud. This catches Kima's attention, so he decides to take some of the tea drink she offered. While Shiori watches, the power goes out and she stumbles into the books. Outside, the committee head was finally able to turn off the power and reset the password. When they ask why she didn't involve a teacher, she explains that it might affect the media room. Inside the library, under a pile of books, Shiori clung to Kima. When she tried to pull away, more of the books fell on them, and Kima said it would be tragic if they were crushed by books. He complained about the real world, and Shiori agreed that it was scary to have to deal with people. She felt Kima understood her and wished she could stay in the quiet forever. Suddenly, Kima called bullshit on her and said she was only scared of saying something that would make others hate her. Shiori insisted that everyone felt that way, but Kima claimed he didn't give a damn about the real world because he believed in his own world. Shiori was sure she loved books, but she also wanted to talk about books to others. In all those instances, she wanted to talk, but now it felt like it was too late, as she was getting drowned by the very books she loved. It felt like her world was crashing down around her, and she wanted to hide away from the rest of the world. She saw a light at the top and tried to reach for it, but it seemed her voice wouldn't reach anyone after all. Suddenly, Kima broke through the books and told her he'd give her the courage she needed. They finally locked lips, and the runaway spirit was forced out of Shiori into Elsie's magic jar. Afterward, the library committee head stormed inside to scold Shiori, but Shiori was able to apologize for causing all that trouble. She insisted that every book had a message to deliver, and she wished that the library was a place where those whispers were heard. The committee members were surprised that she spoke, so as Shiori asked that they rediscuss the book disposal, the committee head agreed to hold another meeting. Shiori agreed to help them with the media room and thanked them for listening. After all that talking, she took a sip from her tea drink, and it seemed to ring a bell. She asked the committee head if there was someone else in there with her, but no one knew what she was talking about. Back on the roof, Elsie finished putting the roof back together, while Kima was back to wasting away in front of a game. He decided he was never playing another library game again. Some days later, Kima visits a gaming shop and comes out exhausted. He then receives several deliveries of games and consoles and gets ready to go God mode. Meanwhile, Elsie felt she was finally getting used to living in the human world. Mary woke up to see she was hard at work and had already cleaned up the cafe too. Mary commended her on being so helpful and wished she was her kid instead of Kima. Just then, a zombie walked into the living room, but it turned out it was just Kima's, so Elsie slapped some color back into him. However, when he finally spoke, he told Elsie that ever since she showed up, he hadn't had enough time to play games. Elsie reminded him that it was all he ever did, but Kima insisted that it wasn't nearly enough. Apparently, negating Sims were piling up in his room, and having a backlog was a sin punishable by zombification. When Kima begged for more time with his games, Mary begged the gods for another son. He then informed them that he was going into a god of conquest mode and ran to his room. Elsie ran after him, but his room was locked. Thankfully, she had her handy raiment from hell and morphed it into a key. She was worried about what she might find behind the door, but it was worse than she thought. Inside were multiple screens, multiple consoles, and multiple gamepads. Kima had activated them all at once and was going ham on all of them at the same time. Elsie wondered if she was witnessing Kima's true form with 100 arms, but she realized they were actually just after images from how fast he was moving. For Kima, this was the closest he was ever getting to having a harem, but Elsie wondered what the point was at all. Kima explained that he first started by playing 2 games simultaneously and was surprised that he pulled it off. Soon he was playing up to 6 games simultaneously, and he even played 12 at once. He shed a tear for 2 of the stories that were touching, but he soon returned to rizzing up pixels again. Kima laughed like a maniac as he confirmed there was no game baddie he couldn't conquer. It was finally time to pull out his secret technique, synchronicity, and altogether, he reached the final stage, which was a kiss with his concubines. Elsie had seen enough to back away slowly for her own safety.
Why are you running?
Mary asked how her deranged son was doing, so Elsie said she was worried about him going without food. Mary told her the games were his own sustenance, but they seemed more like a trip on acid. After clearing 5 games, Kima saw he needed to update his sight, but he suddenly dropped his game as he realized the side effect of going God mode. His lifespan was shortened for 3 years, or at least it felt that way, but Kima thought it was worth it. At that moment, he got a message from someone asking if he had beaten the Princess Derby game yet, so Kima decided to replay the game and started going ham on it. Admittedly, the game was difficult to get through, and once he started seeing double, he was forced to reactivate God mode. He finally conquered the game and sent word back to his fan. However, there were several other Princess Derby series, so he decided to replay them at once. He'd done this before, so it was only a matter of going God mode and doing it again. Mary and Elsie soon heard an explosion as Kima finally overworked his consoles into exploding. At this point, Kima wondered why he was in such a rush instead of savoring the games like he used to. Elsie crept in to check on him, but what she saw looked like a fever dream come to life, and she promptly removed herself. At that moment, Kima dreamt he was in a green field where a girl asked if he was ready. He woke up to find the 6th game ready to continue. Downstairs, Mary and Elsie felt a disturbance in the force, and when Elsie went to look in, she saw that Kima was nearing the point of hospitalization. She begged him to stop the madness, but Kima insisted that he needed to conquer them all. 6 at a time wasn't going to cut it anymore, so he hoped to try 24 at a time. Elsie managed to get him to take a break, though he spent it playing another video game. She told him how sad he was for spending all his time playing video games, but Kima assured her he wasn't suffering. Kima said that he's lived a very fruitful life, but he could no longer stop himself. He returns to his conquest and gets ready to play all 24. Kima watches him like a genius on a piano or a lunatic without a straitjacket. As Kima laughed his way into madness, Elsie exited the room for her own sanity. Later that night, Kima was finally able to make up for a 3-month-long backlog. Suddenly, his reality started glitching, and when he tried to return to gaming, he realized he was burnt out. However, one of the sim girls came to life to stretch a hand, followed by the remaining 23 sim ladies. Kima agreed to go with them, and with one button, he found himself transported into a fevered dream of pigtails, sunders, and hand-holding. Well, Kima did check for brain damage. If you want a part 2 comment, I think my girlfriend has a runaway spirit, and if you like anime recaps like this, watch this video here.